So you let me know. I'm going to try both angles. This is the one, it gets a little bit more of a wider view of what you can see what I'm doing. But when we get up close to doing some dough on the counter and rolling out, I'll move it to that front view so you can see a little more close up. So I know some of you guys have taken cooking classes before. Some of you haven't. Some of you have maybe made pizza dough before. I know Josh has done a class on pizza dough before. We're going to quickly show you how to make pizza dough, but the objective of this class isn't about pizza, but we'll get to that. We're going to just real quick get together pizza dough. Before we start making pizza dough, though, I want to just touch on one subject related to pizza dough and food that I feel like so rarely gets mentioned in cooking shows. And I watch a lot of different food-related content and social media content, and I just rarely hear people talk about the weather. And I think it's so important to touch on for the very detailed reason of it affects you cooking. I live in an old farmhouse I mentioned before, and we don't have central air or anything, so the windows are open in my kitchen right now, so it's a nice warm day outside. So that dictates how I use my ingredients and what ingredients I use in a way, especially like the temperature of your water when it comes to baking and making different kinds of doughs and batters. But I just wanted to mention it because I feel like it's so relevant right now with what we're all going through together with, so often nature gets mentioned as like a third or a fourth or a fifth priority. And in reality, we can't deny the power of nature. It rules everything that we do. And that's just as true when it comes to cooking. So with that in mind, not to get too like philosophical on you, but with that in mind, I just want you to always keep that in mind when you're cooking, because it should matter. It should matter with anything, just pay attention to what's going on with the weather. So today we have a hot, not crazy humid day, but the heat outside is going to drive me to use the coldest water that I can to make pizza dough if I don't want it to ferment too quickly. So we're going to keep pizza dough real simple. You're going to measure out your flour. Now, I have a pizza business, okay? Some of you may or may not know that. My wife and I and our family, we run a wood-fired farm-to-table pizza business. I mention that because I'm not exactly going to give you my dough recipe. I'll just put that out there, okay? Not my exact recipe, but I'm just going to give you a basic pizza dough recipe. So if it doesn't come out exactly like stone bend pizza, just know that was intentional. Okay. So you're going to start with your flour. Depending on how much you want to make, you could need anywhere from, I do in grams, so I know that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but I do recommend if you're going to get more and more into cooking, buy yourself a little kitchen scale. You can get a good one for $20-30, and it's really, really much better to go do things by weight rather than cups. And you'll find once you get used to it, it's way easier than digging your flour cup into the bag and trying to knife it clean and be level and all that stuff and consistent. You'll find your recipe change a lot. When you do it by weight, it's going to be pretty much the same every time, outside of that whole weather factor I mentioned. Okay, so we're going to we got our flour pre-measured here. And we're going to do, so you can use, some people do sourdough. If you do sourdough, you can definitely take a sourdough approach to the dough. We're going to use instant yeast for the sake of time and consistency. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay. So with instant yeast, you don't have to do this, but some cooking shows will tell you to bloom your yeast, put it in some warm water or just some water in general, warm milk, depending on what you're making, to make sure it's active still. I know my yeast is fresh, so I don't have to worry about that. So, and I also know how much I'm going to use, but you're just going to use a few grams depending on how much pizza you're using. Just for instance, for 30 pizzas that I make, I use 20 grams of yeast. So just to give you an idea of how little you have to use when you're making a small amount of home. Okay. Mix our yeast in. And like I said, we're going to use the coldest water possible on a warm day. And if it's a cold winter day, use some warm water. It all depends on your house too. If you have a nice warm kitchen that gets warm really easily and you can proof bread in there, or you can proof things really easily, hey, go for it. Like you can have much more control over what you do. I'm constantly having to think about the weather in this house and how cold or warm it is, especially in the winter here. Good luck proofing a loaf of bread or anything else in my house between November and March, you have to do it in the oven with a warm pot of water, because that's the only way you're going to do it, because it's pretty much 50 degrees in our house. Okay, once you get your, now there's different takes on this too, so you want to make sure you salt your dough, just like anything in cooking, you want to salt your dough. So some people say you don't want to salt it until after it proofs for 30 minutes or so. Some people tell you it doesn't matter at all. I personally like to salt it after it's proofed for a little while. The reason that is, just so you know, for baking, when you put salt in with yeast, especially like with a sourdough or like a live yeast, a fresh yeast, what happens is the salt actually kind of slows the activity down. So some people, like myself, like to wait to add that salt until the dough is proofed for a little while and has a chance to really get some activity going. Okay. Some more water here. I like to mix by hand with pizza dough. I'm a real hands-on kind of person. When we plant our crops, we do everything by hand as well. So like I like getting my hands dirty. But you can totally mix this in a mixer, like, you know, a stand mixer or whatever, with a dough hook. You want to do it with a dough hook. It's not going to work with a whisk or a paddle. It's not going to work as well with a paddle. It will work with a paddle. Okay, a little more flour here. So getting onto this pizza dough thing, I know I mentioned that we're not making pizza today. And the reason we're making pizza dough is to show you all the things you can do with pizza dough when you have leftover pizza dough. Or more specifically, if you're going to make pizza dough, make twice as much so you can make some of these things and make it more worth your time, okay? So some of the things we're going to be making today are just bread-related things, obviously. It's real simple. So pita is probably the first thing I ever started making on a regular basis with leftover pizza dough, because it's something we could use for a snack or sandwiches or whatever. So my dough's a little wet. If you find your dough's a little wet, depending on what dough recipe you're using, you just want to take your flour, and you don't want to add a bunch at one time. It doesn't take much to make a difference. Just sprinkle a little flour and work it until it stops sticking to your hands. There's a little trick some of you may have learned before if you've done a little bit of cooking, called washing your hands with flour. When you work with dough like this, it's sticky, very sticky, to the point where you might get annoyed. And I know that might sound silly, it's just pizza dough, but it gets annoying because you want to get it off your hands. You don't want to waste any dough. So what you do is take a little bit of flour, sprinkle it over your hands like you were washing your hands with water, and then rub it together like this. I know we're all very used to washing hands at this point, so there we go. And you'll see that flour just pulls all that dough right off your hands. And then not only are your hands free of most of what was on there, you'll see. I could do it more, but I don't want to add too much flour to the dough. But I still have all that dough too. I can just incorporate it right back into the pizza dough. Okay, this pizza dough is just about ready. We're going to knead it a little bit, because just like anything with when you're trying to develop chew, you know, we all like a chewy pizza crust. It's got some crisp, right? We all like to give it a bite into it and kind of tear it away a little bit. It's got to have a little bit of resistance. So the way you get that is by developing the gluten. And the way you develop the gluten is by working a little bit, kneading it. You don't have to go crazy. You don't have to do it for like 10 minutes or anything. But just, you're going to see a difference in this dough as you knead it. You're going to see a difference, and it's going to get smooth. See what it looks like now. A little bumpy, but only a couple little dry spots that you can see right there. But I'm going to knead it like for another minute here, and you're going to see. And when you knead, a really easy way to do it, you'll see this hand. I turn this hand and then push it forward, and then quarter rotate, push it forward. It's a really quick thing, and you get to even knead that way. And then as you do that, you're going to end up with this really, you're just going to know. You're going to say, you know what? That looks like pizza dough I've seen before. And you'll see my pizza dough looks a little bit different than a lot of pizza dough you've seen before, because, as I've mentioned before, if you've had cooking classes with us, that we use 100% local flour. This is a way less processed flour. It's an organically produced flour. It just looks a little bit more like a whole grain, what people would identify as a whole wheat. So it's not white, and it's not as smooth as some pizza doughs. But if you go to the store and you use like a very, very like commercially produced white flour, it's going to come out a little bit different than this and looking a little bit more like what you're used to. Okay, so the pizza dough's ready. So when your pizza dough's ready, you're going to put it in the bowl. So as I mentioned before, we don't like to use a lot of plastic. We don't have to. So in this case, if you want to use saran wrap to cover your bowl nice and tight, you can, and put it in a warm place to proof. When I say warm, it could be 80 degrees. It could be high 70s. Really, just the warmest place you have in your house. And let it proof for, it could be an hour. It could be 4 hours. You could really get crazy. Today, I was really kind of pushing the limit with the dough I made earlier for this class, and I let it proof outside for like 4 hours in my back room here. If you want to make pizza dough ahead of time, you can leave it in the fridge proofing for 72, 96 hours. We actually purposely proof our dough for our pizza business a minimum of 48 hours, if not 72 hours. And that makes a huge difference, not only in the taste and the way the dough develops and how it is to work with, but it makes a huge difference in the health factor and the way your body digests that dough as well. A lot of it's been broken down, a lot of the bad things that your body has a hard time with the gluten. So like I said, so you can cover it with plastic. I like to take a wet towel. Just take a wet towel, pretty wet, because I don't want it to be dripping wet, because you obviously don't want any more water introduced to the dough, and you don't want it dripping on the dough directly. That wouldn't be good. So just get it wet, thoroughly wet, and then wring it out as much as you possibly can so it won't drip. And then take that and cover your bowl. So that way, your dough's not going to dry out. It's not really going to absorb any of that water directly, but it will keep it from drying out, okay? Take that, put it where you're going to proof it, or in the fridge. If you're going to put it in the fridge for a couple of days to proof, I do recommend having a container that has a lid, or like I said, worst case, using plastic wrap. We use for our
Hey, Terry,
pizza.
could you tell us what the basic amounts of the ingredients are again, and what?
Sure. So let me break down numbers. My numbers I have in my head for pizza ingredients are larger than the amount you want to make. So let's say if you wanted to make 10 pizzas, let's say, or let's say you wanted to make 4 pizzas and a couple baguettes and some pita bread and a few things. Let's do that amount. So you're going to do 500 grams of flour. Okay, and that's all. I use all-purpose flour. Some people swear by using bread flour for pizza dough. You don't have to, but you're welcome to use that if you'd like. But I use all-purpose. And then 350 grams of water. And like I said, base that temperature of the water on your needs and where you live. Salt. Again, this is one of these ones where it depends how salty you want your dough, but if you want kind of a middle-of-the-road saltiness that you're not going to notice the salt, but you're not going to notice that it's not there either, that's going to be 18 to 20 grams of salt. And then yeast is going to be, let's say, 3 grams. And then some optional ingredients you can put in there that I don't personally swear by, but some people put olive oil in their dough. They swear it makes a crispier crust. It depends on what kind of pizza you're making, but you can definitely put some olive oil in there. And you could also some people put, there was a period of time before I started selling pizza that we would put a little honey in our dough, a couple tablespoons of honey. But outside of that, that's a basic pizza dough recipe. Because you saw how long it takes to mix, and that same pizza dough, I'm not going to change it at all. That's the recipe I made earlier that we're going to make these other things with. Okay, this pita bread, the bread, the stromboli or calzone, and if we have time, I'll show you how to make a bialy too, if you're familiar with that. So we're going to put this in the proofing place, and if you got any questions, I'll be right back.
Does anyone have any questions so far? You got the ingredients typed up in the chat.
Yeah, he used to.
Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Oh, thank you.
Did you have a question?
No? Anybody else? Question?
You can continue, Terry. I'll check with Manuel in
Okay.
the chat and see if.
Okay, we're gonna move on to pita. I'm gonna grab our dough. So I know I've mentioned in previous cooking classes that I do not like to skip over steps, but this one next little step we are going to skip over. It's not a big deal. It's super easy and straightforward. So when your dough's ready, it's going to be this big, ball of dough or clump of dough. Because once it proofs, depending on how much you let it proof, it's not going to necessarily be in a tight ball like that little ball you saw. It's going to be way more broken down and airy and soft. You can knock some of the air out of it if you like, but you just move it onto a lightly floured counter. And you're just going to form it into a mass, just a ball. And, or it's, I guess a blob would probably be, it's not really, I don't want you to think it's going to be a ball because it's not. It's going to be more like a giant loaf of bread. And you're just going to separate it with a knife or a dough knife if you have one into the sizes you want. So for a typical pizza, for a 12-inch pizza, you want to weigh out approximately 275 to 300 grams of dough. For a 12-inch pizza. For like a 16-inch large pizza, kind of regular pizza, it's like 450 grams of dough. But like I said, weigh out what you want. For our purposes now, like I said, we're not doing pizza, so we're going to do pita. Pita's great. You don't have to make a lot of dough to make a lot of pita. Standard, about 100 grams of dough I'll use for a pita. Okay, you can make them bigger if you want. You can make them smaller. We don't make them huge in our house, but you can do whatever you like. I do about 100 grams of dough. So we're going to do pita first. So I've divided mine out already, weighed them out, and then I let them proof again. So once you divide your pieces out, if you like, you can form them into little balls, okay? And then you can let them proof again if you like. You don't have to do that. I did that for the sake of this class and had to sit, but you could form your pitas right there once you put that dough on the counter. You don't have to let them proof again. So we're going to take the 100 grams of dough. Doesn't look pretty, it's just a piece of dough. It doesn't have to be perfectly round, doesn't have to be anything, okay? And we're gonna do, there's a term for this in French, and I don't know what it is because I'm not that learned. So you fold your dough in half, like a moon, or whatever, close to a moon, doesn't have to be exact. And then you're just gonna roll it out, okay? And then I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna fold it in half again. Like this. Make sure you flour, just like we're doing pastry dough or anything else. You want to make sure you flour it enough to where it doesn't stick, but not flour to the point where it doesn't stick at all and where you can't roll it out. So I'm going to do my best now to roll it into the shape that I want it to be in, which I kind of want it to be kind of a circle oval shape. But like I said, you can do what you like, okay? And you're just going to, I'm going to move this a little bit better here. If you can see that any better, I don't know. Okay, so we're just rolling it out into kind of a, mine looks more like a diamond right now, to be honest with you, but it just goes to show you, really authentic pita, it looks weirdly shaped, so it's perfect. So then we take that, it doesn't look like much, it just looks like a floppy piece of dough, okay? We're gonna take that, and I'm gonna do my best here to carry this with me. I should have told you this before, but we preheated our oven. Now, as far as oven tip goes for this kind of stuff, you can be kind of liberal. My oven does not regulate temperature well, but I put it as hot as it would go. 500, I almost dropped that. 500 degrees, but you could do 400, 450. I like to do the hottest temperature possible when I'm doing breads like this. And then, I don't know if I can show you this, to be honest with you, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to show you how I put this in the oven and show you how simple it is so you're not intimidated to do it. We're getting a little creative here. Okay. So you're going to see, I'm going to slap this right on a pizza stone that we keep. You don't have to have a pizza stone. You can do it on a pan if you want. I do recommend if you want to get into cooking more, pizza stones are not very expensive and you can make a lot of things better with a pizza stone. So you can see that pizza stone sitting in there. I'm just going to carefully not burn my hand and flap it right on there. Check it out. Can you see that? So it looks like almost like a piece of flatbread. We're going to close it up. We're going to leave it not long. So I don't know about you, but I forget easily. So I never, ever not set a timer. Never, ever. I don't care if it's 2 minutes. I don't care if it's 20 minutes. Even if I swear I'm going to remember, I set a timer. So no matter what I get going on in the kitchen in that next minute, I don't forget. Because I tell you what, it never fails. I do. Okay. So we're going to make another pita. Any questions on the pita so I can accentuate any particular step? I know it's pretty straightforward, but I'm going to make another one here. So you let me know if you have any questions real quick before I'm going to check on the other one while you're thinking here. Okay. I want to show you the pita puffing up and see what happens. It's really fun. In the wood-fired oven that we use for our pizza business, you can watch everything cook, obviously, because the oven's open. With this particular oven, I'm so scared to leave the oven open and show you it cooking because, baking, because I'm going to lose so much heat out of that oven.
How long at that temp, Terry?
I mean, as hot as you want to put your oven, I'd say at least 400 or hotter. And you put that pita in there until it puffs up and looks the way you want. It'll take like 2 minutes, 3 minutes maybe. It's one of those things. It really is going to depend on how much heat comes from the bottom and the top of your oven. But it is going to be a quick thing that you just want to kind of be on. And obviously, I wouldn't normally just make one at a time. I'd probably make a couple in my oven at one time. So I'll show you. It's starting to puff up here. Check it out. You see that puff? So what happens is when you fold it over like that and roll it, there's air trapped inside, obviously, and there's air trapped inside the dough already. So when you bake it and you make all that air hot, it can't escape. A lot of it can't escape, so it naturally puffs up inside, and that's how you get that pocket inside of the pita. These ones obviously aren't like commercially produced ones. They're not all going to be perfectly uniform, but let me tell you, they're going to be a lot tastier than those ones. Because there's a lot of people don't know this, but bread, people worry about eating things like potato chips and salty food like that, and that's what makes their sodium go through the roof. But really what it is bread. Commercial bread is full of so much salt. A typical slice of bread has some insane amount of salt. I can't remember the number, but it's shocking. And it's because bread isn't meant to really, you see how firm that is? Look at that. You can see through it. So that's ready. So that took 2 minutes. 2 minutes exactly, actually. And we'll just let it cool. It'll cool in like less than a minute. So you're ready to eat it. And really, I don't even like to let it cool all the way. Just like get some fresh hummus or some tzatziki and go crazy. Okay. So we're just going to roll out one more pita. We're going to make this one prettier than the last one. This piece of dough is a little nicer. Flour your dough. And I've said this before, but just in case you're new, when you roll out this dough, you go from the center of the dough, okay? You don't roll, some people like picture rolling dough like a steamroller where you start at one end and you just kind of like go over it. That's not going to give you an evenly rolled out dough. You're going to have thin and thick spots. Start at the middle of the dough and then go out and then rotate. It's just a simple little thing you do like that. And then if you feel that dough starting to stick more than you want it to, drag it through the flour. Going from the middle every time. Rolled it out. I'm going to fold it over. Roll it out. And the folding part, it's up to you how you want your bread to develop. I like to fold mine. You could just roll out a piece of dough and bake it that way, and you're going to get a delicious pita, like most likely a flatbread. It really depends on kind of how you're dough proof. But either way, whether you fold it 3 times, 2 times, whatever shape you want to do, it's going to be delicious. It's going to be hot, fresh bread. And that's just like the staple of good food, in my opinion, hot, fresh bread. You don't have to have much else. Like, how many times have you sat down to dinner so hungry at a restaurant and they put out fresh bread for you and you ate so much of it that you didn't even care about getting a meal after that? Or is that just me? Is that just me? No. I love bread. It's a problem. But it matters, not all bread's created equal. Like I said, you don't want to be eating a ton of bread full of preservatives. You're just going to feel you're not going to feel well. See a difference. I always tell people pizza got a bad rap in this country because a lot of pizza in this country is made with the same cheap ingredients. And I like that pizza just fine. I've eaten it plenty in my life. but it doesn't make you feel great. Okay. Here we go. We're going in again. Look, I got this floppy thing of dough here in my hand. I'm just gonna slap it down. Right in the oven. I'll set the timer again, because we practice what we preach. Okay. We're gonna let that bake. Any questions on the pita real quick? You can do anything with pita. Just leave some. If you could bake some, throw it in the freezer, wrap it in some whatever you use, and put it in the freezer, and pull it out when you need to. When you ran out of bread and you don't have any, we stuff it with everything from just veggies to. We make falafel. We use it. We cut it up. The older ones we'll cut up, toast them, and use them just as a chip. You know, a pita chip, and dip it in whatever we have laying around. Just a great little light snack. You know, in the summer especially. If you make salads, if you have fresh greens growing in your backyard, or you're into salads, it's great to have some pitas, especially if you could cut some up, dress them with some olive oil and some garlic or some whatever seasoning you like, and have some really awesome pita chips that are fresh, preservative free, besides obviously the natural salt that we're putting in it. And it's right there. You made it. It feels great. It tastes better that way. We're gonna check our pita. Oh, look at how puffy that one is. That looks nice. You know, it's kind of a heart shape. Oh, yeah, look at that. That wasn't on purpose. It's a heart shape. We're going to pull that out in 1 second. Let's taste this. Let's see if my wife wants some. Shaughnessy?
Hi, guys.
Could use a little more salt. Okay, look at this one. I made this for you.
Aww.
Oh, it's hot. It's hot. It's hot. Okay, so this is the heart-shaped one that we just made by accident. Look at that. And this one's super puffy, perfect for pita. You just split it and fill it. Okay. We're going to head back over here and move on to the next project. So, for a couple years, I was making pitas with leftover pizza dough until I was reading this one pizza genius's book about how he makes to make hoagie rolls. Now, I grew up in and outside of Philadelphia a lot of my childhood. So hoagies, as we call them there, are just a staple to the diet. And it's hard to get a good hoagie roll a lot of places in this country. So if you want to make the best hoagie around, we're going to make it. So we're going to take a big piece of our dough. Now this piece of dough, I did 300 grams of dough, 300 grams of our dough. You can make these as big or as little as you want. And this is the easiest way to make bread, in my opinion, or like what looks like a loaf of bread or a baguette. And it's just with pizza dough. That's all you need. So what we're going to do, we take our pizza round. This was kind of a pizza round that got flattened. So normally you would flatten this out into a round thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to hold the corners of it. We're going to let it hang a little bit. And we're going to turn it to a nice kind of big rectangle. Okay, and don't be scared to flour it. Obviously, you don't want to overly flour it to the point where it's ridiculous, but you can flour it enough to where it doesn't stick too much. I'm going to flour both sides. And then I'm going to actually pat it out. I already have a rectangle, but I'm just going to pat it out into, I hesitate to say the thinnest or the flattest version you could do, but I'd say a 1/4 inch maybe thick. It's not going to be even, so don't expect it to be even, okay? How's it going over there, buddy? How's the dough going? I see you working. Good? Okay. All right, so I got this nice rectangle. Mine's probably with that 300 grams of dough. And you can see, like I said, it's not perfect. You can see kind of little holes in it and thinner spots. That's no big deal. You're going to see why. Make a nice rectangle. Mine's like 12 inches wide by 9 inches long, but again, it does not matter. So what we're going to do, I want to see if I can show you this here somehow. Okay. I'm going to take the side furthest away from me. And if you've ever made cinnamon rolls, or even if you haven't, if you've even just ever rolled up those Pillsbury crescent rolls, that's basically what you're going to do. You're just going to roll this up and kind of tuck it as you go. So that way, less air gets trapped in the middle, and you're just rolling it up like anything, I guess, like a real basic kind of action. And when you get to the end, I like to push it back in together to make it a little thicker. When you get to the end, flip it over, and your dough's probably not sealed, you know, to where it would probably unwrap if you didn't do anything. So take that and just pinch it a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. You'll see this kind of bread we're making, this is just about not wasting food, making some fresh bread. It doesn't have to be the prettiest thing in the world. Just pinch it so it doesn't completely open up on you. Take a little bit more flour, just a little bit, and then roll it in that flour, okay? So that way you don't have, see, mine came unwrapped. I didn't pinch it enough. Okay, roll it in that flour, okay? Now, you don't have to have one of these fancy pizza peel things. You can do it on anything, a wooden cutting board, just flour or wooden cutting board, just to slide it in there. Or worst case, just hold it with your hands. Make it short enough to where you can hold it with your hands and set it on a pan in the oven, or if you have a baking stone, like a pizza stone, like I said. But this could put it right on a pan, put it right in the oven. We're going to put it in that same oven. Like I said, it could be between 400 and 500 degrees. You don't want it to be hotter than 500, just because you're not going to get the center of that bread to bake as much as you want. I'd say ideally, if your oven regulates temperature well, you want it to be 400 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes, or until it looks right to you. So we moved our bread. It's a really thin little baguette here. You can keep in mind, the shape you make's up to you. You can make it thicker. I like to make them a little thinner because they can bake a little quicker at a higher temperature, which I like, and you don't end up with a doughy inside. Before you put it in, you're gonna take your knife, okay, and you're just gonna vent it here, okay? Don't be scared to make those cuts, you know, 1/8 of an inch deep, 1/4 inch deep even. It's not gonna hurt, okay? I'm gonna show you what that looks like from the top. If I can here. It's hard for me to see what I'm showing you there. Okay. And then we're gonna slide that right in the oven. And this is gonna be real baking time. I'm gonna show you how quick this is. So one thing
Can you remind us how long you're proofing your dough for at room temperature?
Again, you could do an hour if you're like, let's say you a last minute thing, you're like, oh, let's make pizza tonight. You don't have time to plan. You could make that dough, let it sit for an hour in a warm place, and get everything else together, and it'd be ready to go. It'd be delicious. It's still going to be great pizza. Ideally, I'd let it ferment in the bowl for 2 days in the fridge. In the fridge, obviously. When you ferment your dough or you proof your dough in the fridge, it's going to obviously be a lot colder. That obviously goes without saying. But because of the coldness and the lower temperature, it's going to be a slower fermentation. Okay, so it allows everything to kind of break down a little bit more and process the gluten a little bit more and the sugar. So that way you end up just with a lighter dough, easily digestible dough. As uninteresting as that may sound, trust me when I tell you, you'll be happy when you eat the dough. It's just going to make you're not going to feel all groggy and weighed down by the pizza or the bread or the pita. But like I said, it's a really flexible window. That's one of my motivations for doing this particular theme for this class when I was talking to Josh about different classes, is because this is one of those things that's super flexible. You could have some old pizza dough. Like you could have made pizza 2 days ago, left over with this dough. And if you're like me, and another theme of this class is just not wasting stuff. You know, our food system is very, very broken up to where the people that need the food don't get it, and the people that have the food have too much. I personally do not like to be a part of the waste stream, so we don't throw things out. So if we get done with let's say we get rained out on a pizza night, we end up with like 20 or 30 extra pizza doughs. I don't throw those out. I will come back to the farm and use the heat on the oven the next morning to just bake a bunch of bread and give it to my neighbors, because the money's already been put in, you know? So this is one of those great things that you can just have old stuff laying around and use it, and it be not even a compromise. You'll be happy you didn't decide to go buy someone else's food that is full of those preservatives and those things to try to make it taste good when yours is going to taste good because you made it. So the proofing's flexible. The baking, again, with this kind of stuff, the bread you want to be a little more exact with because you need it to bake a certain amount of time, obviously, to not end up with a doughy center. But the pita, like I said, it could take 1 minute to 3 minutes in your oven if you, depending on the temperature, you're able to get your oven to. If you like to grill outside and you want to avoid being in a hot kitchen in the summer and you don't have air conditioning like me, you can get a grill fired up, okay? Get a grill fired up, put a cast iron pan on that grill, and cook your pita on there. You'll have to flip it, obviously, but it'll be great. You can really get creative, and it just kind of goes back to that really traditional element of cooking where it's just you need fire and you need flour and water. You know, it doesn't get much simpler than that. It goes back as long as recorded history goes, I believe. So, all right. So that bread's going to be in the oven for a little bit. I'm like I told you before, I'm going to check and see if I remember to set the timer. I did not. I'm going to check it. Ooh, it's looking good already. So like I mentioned, just goes to show you can do it, whatever you can do with poor equipment. Our oven's horrible, and I have no idea what the temperature the oven is right now in my house. But that bread's looking great. But always better to go on the lower end of the timer than the higher end, because you can always add more time, but you can't take it away, if you know what I mean. Once it's burnt, it's burnt. Okay. So the final piece to this class, the pièce de resistance, is the calzone or the stromboli. Because does everyone here ever had a calzone and stromboli? Everybody? Raise your hand if you haven't ever had a calzone or stromboli.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think there are people here who haven't had one.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's even better, because you're gonna have a new favorite food. Okay. So a stromboli or calzone, it's actually an Italian American dish, but basically it's pizza dough rolled out thinner than you would normally do it, and you stuff it. Like a lot of foods in a lot of countries, it's basically a bread filled with things. Okay. So this is pizza dough filled with cheeses, vegetables if you want, tomatoes, really whatever you want to put in there. I don't like to put sauce inside my stromboli because I like to dip it in sauce. And it just makes it easier to make if you don't put too much liquidy stuff in it, you'll find. So we're going to do that. So again, with the dough we're going to use, you could do 250 grams of dough. You could do 350 grams of dough. Some people like to make very big single strombolis or calzones that are like big enough to feed 4 people. Sometimes with our family, we like to set them up and do smaller dough so the kids can make their own, and they're smaller ones, and that's fun too. So you decide how big you want it to be. The one I'm doing right now, this right here, is 300 grams of dough. I'm going to flour it well, obviously. Flip it, flour it. And then we're going to roll it out. So remember what I told you about rolling it out. From the middle out. From the middle out. Not too thin, not too thick. So you got to decide when you eat your stromboli, when you're eating a stuffed piece of bread with things in it, do you want to taste mostly the bread or do you want to taste mostly the filling? Myself, I like a thin, crispy crust with maybe like a thicker edge and a nice, like, prevalent filling. I don't like when I get something that I'm really excited about, some asparagus something or other, and I don't even taste any asparagus. So I like to go a little thinner crust. But again, you don't want to get too greedy with that, because the thinner you go, you could probably guess this, but the thinner you go with this crust, the harder it is going to be to bake, to move it and manipulate it. It's going to be, imagine a giant water balloon, but instead it's dough filled with things that want to come out. So just keep that in mind. So once we get this as thin as we want, which this is about there for me, it's probably 1/8 of an inch thick, maybe a little bit thinner or thicker at certain places. Doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of the fixing, you're going to see, this doesn't have to start off perfect, but it's going to be how you kind of finish it up, kind of like wrapping a present. It's the finished product is what's going to matter the most here, okay? So whatever you're using as your pizza peel or your cutting board with flour, whatever you're using, flour it well. I'd say more so than you have before. Flour it well. And then when your dough's ready, you're just going to set it right on there before you put anything in it, okay? We're going to set the whole dough right on there. I'm going to try to show you that. So the dough's right on whatever tool you're using or cutting board you're using to slide your calzone or stromboli ultimately in the oven. Okay, so it only has to move once from here. I'm going to check my bread real quick. Almost. We're almost there with the bread. Okay. So, big tip for making strombolis or calzones. A lot of people don't know the difference. The biggest difference between calzones and strombolis is that calzones typically have ricotta in them, okay? So it's going to be a little bit more of a, little more like lasagna filling in a way, except typically you don't put ground beef in a calzone. Stromboli is going to be more mozzarella based. It's going to have more of a chewy, stretchy cheese filling, and not as, I don't want to use the word liquidy, but not as liquidy as ricotta at least, okay? So mozzarella, I like doing strombolis, a little bit easier than calzones, and you need less ingredients typically. So this, I'm very proud of. This is mozzarella that we make, that we grated up. This is all local dairy that we get, gets turned into cheese curd by Lively Run Dairy. Okay, so we can get real generous with this cheese, depending on, you know, how you like it. I like it really cheesy. This is not a health food. Okay. And then from there, you can put whatever you want. We have fresh asparagus right now coming from the garden, so that's what I'm using. Now, as far as the veggies go, or whatever you put in here, you can pre-cook them like we did with like a pot pie filling or things like that. You don't have to pre-cook them though either, depending on how you want your vegetables. This asparagus, when I cook asparagus, I saute it, you know, basically flash saute it. So I want it to still taste and feel like asparagus. So if you put it in here, when it bakes in the oven for 15 minutes or whatever, however long you bake it, the steam and all the moisture in there and the heat, it's going to basically cook that asparagus in there. But it's totally up to you. If you want to pre-saute it a little bit, that's not going to hurt it, okay? Onions as well. When I make them for my kids, I pre-saute the onions because they don't like as strong an onion flavor. For me, I like them raw in there. Don't follow my lead. I can't feel my fingertips as much as I used to. So this is our finished bread. Side note real quick. A nice crusty little baguette or a hoagie roll or whatever you want to call it. You can make it thicker if you want to make a hoagie too, but I like it like this. So that's your bread. And you saw how quick it was. That's how easy it is to make your own fresh bread. You don't have to be a genius. I mean, I like making sourdough too. We do that as well. This is for the person who does not have the time or the schedule conducive to making sourdough. If you work from home and you're able to be home all the time, that's a lot easier. But if you're on a schedule where you're gone most of the day, sourdough is pretty tough. I mean, not that you can't do it, but this is something you can make in 20 minutes if the oven's preheated from start to finish. Okay. Back to our stromboli because we don't want to leave it sitting here too long. So we've got all our fillings in here. We got asparagus, we've got yellow onion, and we've got mozzarella. I don't think there's anything else I want to put in there right now. So I'm going to fold it over. I'm going to fold it over, as you might imagine you would. And it's okay, as long as your dough stays somewhat together, you're fine. And then basically pick the point where you want to join it. And what I mean is, if you look at this right now, you can see it's got a nice, well, you can see where all the filling is, but there's a bunch of extra dough. So I'm basically going to pick the point. I'm trying to hold this and show you, but pick the point where I want it to end. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this step and then I'll show you again. I'm going to fold that dough over. I'm trying to think of a comparison in non-food stuff. Making like an envelope, basically. You're closing an envelope. You're taking that bottom piece of dough and you're folding it over the top piece of dough, and then you're pushing it down. So I'll show you again now that I did that. You see now it's more like a half moon shape. So I took the excess dough and I folded it over the other piece and then just push it down with my fingers. And now, you want to get a little fancy? You get a little fancy. I've got one of these, which I talked about before, but this is a little pasta tool or a little cookie tool, depending on what you're using it for. I can take this little thing and I can just cut around. And get rid of that extra dough. But now, when I say get rid of it, don't throw it out. That's enough dough to make a pita right there. That's lunch for tomorrow. I'm going to pat it back down. Another way you can do that decorative, if you don't have one of those little silly tools, use a fork. This is the oldest way to do it. And just, you know that trick. Anybody ever seen that trick? You can use it. It's used in every culture, I think. Oh, and if it gets stuck, you see that? That's a good lesson here. I didn't stop to flour my fork. Flour your fork so it doesn't get stuck on your dough. Do it every, few times you press down. Okay, and then you got this cool little thing here. Look at this. It's like a giant dumpling. Look at that. Okay, and then just like our bread, we got to make some vents here. I know it's scary to cut into something you just filled with a bunch of ingredients, but don't worry. Remember, it's not going to move much after this. We're going to take it over to our oven. And again, 450 degrees, 400 degrees, right in that range. And this we got to be real careful with. I'm going to put this down for a sec so I don't mess this up. There we go. And there it is in the oven. Again, if you don't have a pizza stone, you don't even have to worry about that transfer. All you have to do is build your calzone or your stromboli right on your baking pan. And then you just slip that pan right in the oven. I would recommend, if you're doing it on a baking pan, take the lead with the baking stone and just put it on the bottom rack, as low as you can put that rack. So that way it can bake long enough. And of course, I forgot again, let's set our timer. I'm going to set mine to 12, 13 minutes, just because I don't trust this oven. I think you're going to bake yours at least 15 minutes, if not 20. It depends how big you made it. It depends how crazy you got with your fillings. It's your world. I don't want to tell you how to build your stromboli, your calzone. But now, the magic of cooking shows. Here it is. Here is our finished one that I made in a different shape earlier. So this is like a half moon shape with some fringes on the end. But we're going to cut into it so you can see here. You can hear it's super, super crusty and crunchy. It's hard for me to cut with one hand. Let me try this. Okay, we're going to cut into it. And this had time to cool before I started, so you can see here. This is the filling. Oh, where's it at? Mozzarella, asparagus, onion. Now you'll see what I mean. Thin dough here. Thin dough, you see the filling? Thicker dough here. You decide how you want it to be. I know some people in my family like the thicker dough. I like more filling. So that's a stromboli. I got a full mouth. While that's baking, any questions as of right now? That dough needed more salt. What do you think? Questions? Don't be shy. Even if you think it's a simple one, trust me, none of us started knowing all of this. I was lucky to meet really talented people along the way that were okay with me picking their brain constantly. And that's what I'd like you to do. That's why we're here as a resource. It could be the simplest thing. I didn't know anything on how to do any of this 10 years ago. So don't be shy. I've still got a little piece of dough left here. I'm going to just turn it into something while I'm waiting for you to ask a million questions.
Yeah, it's 4:51. Do you have time to put together some garlic?
Garlic nuts?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. I promised my wife I wouldn't make these anymore.
Is it because they're too addictive?
Oh my God, dude, you're talking to the guy who never left a pizzeria without the garlic nuts in addition to the pizza. So people do this different ways. I do it a pretty simple way. I flatten that dough out. I take a strip of it and I turn it into exactly a knot. You tie a knot with it, basically. Some people just roll them up. I like to do a traditional thing, tie the knot. Now, depending on how you want it flavored.
Can you?
Yeah, I'll show you again.
Okay.
So I just wanted to grab real quick. Can't make garlic knots without garlic. So while we're talking about learning basic things about cooking, I don't want to assume that anyone knows anything. So if you have never bought whole garlic and you've always bought the stuff that was prepackaged and minced, take your garlic. It can be annoying if you don't know these kind of tricks. Take your largest knife, basically your flattest knife, and just safely press down on top of it, okay? That's going to smush it. I know a lot of you have seen this before and some of you haven't, but that's going to make it so easy to just, look at that. Look at how that peel comes off. And then you have usable garlic, okay? So I'm going to mince that up. Now, if you're going to do a bunch of garlic, you don't have to be a glutton for punishment. If you're going to do a bunch of garlic for a bunch of stuff at one time, like when I'm doing all our garlic for our pizza, I use my food processor, okay? And I grind up 10 bulbs of garlic at one time. But you still have to peel it, obviously. There is no replacement for real fresh garlic that is grown in your area. And I'm very specific in saying that because a lot of people don't know that most of our garlic is imported from far outside of the country, which I have no like moral issue with, but the garlic is just not fresh. And it's a huge difference in the way it tastes. It tastes like a different ingredient altogether, honestly, when you're dealing with real fresh garlic. So we're gonna take that little garlic. I'm just gonna take this little vessel that's close to me here that I had water in. I'm gonna dump the garlic in there, some oil, and I'm just gonna agitate it a little bit with a fork or a spoon. Just make a simple little garlic oil. That's one of those things that sounds way fancier than it is. It's just garlic and oil. If you want to do it roasted, you can, but you're gonna cook these in the oven, so you don't have to. So I'm gonna cut another strip. Someone said they wanted to see. Now this dough is not the easiest to work with right now, but we're gonna do it. So you get your little strip of dough. You can roll it up if you want to make it a little easier on yourself like this. Just kind of, you know, a mess of rope of dough. And then just tie it like you would a regular knot. You know, just one knot. You're not pulling it super tight. Don't worry about pulling it super tight. It's gonna puff up on its own, okay? Now there's a few ways to do this. You can just take your garlic oil and, you know, run it with a brush, a pastry brush, which I have right here. You can just use a pastry brush, you know, like this, or your finger. I didn't always have a pastry brush. And just brush it over the garlic knot. I like mine really garlicky, so I probably do both sides. And you can put them on a pan again, or you can put them right on that rack in the oven. I'll show you in a second. We're gonna make another way you can do this. You can take your flat piece of dough, take the whole thing, take your garlic oil and garlic, and just spread it on the whole thing at once. If you know you're making a bunch of them, I mean, you might as well, right? Why not make a bunch of them? Because I'll eat them all, every single one of them. Okay, so once you do that, you can cut your strips and then make your little dough rope and tighten the knot. It's gonna be, you know, you're gonna lose some garlic, you're gonna lose a little oil, but for the most part, it's gonna stay on there. And then that way, if you do it that way, when you do it, there'll be a little bit inside, there'll be a little bit outside. It won't just be a coating on the outside. Does anybody here get garlic knots? Are you like me, where if you go into a pizzeria that has garlic knots, you're automatically buying them?
Hey, Terry, would you let those rise at all, or do they just go right into the oven?
You totally could if you have that time. You know, it never hurts to let something proof a little bit more. My opinion. Obviously, it gets harder to work with, but if you have them on a pan, it wouldn't hurt. But I'll throw them right in, and I'm going to show you what they look like. I'm going to throw a couple in real quick, just right in the oven. And I'm literally just going to toss these things in there, right next to the stromboli. Oh, that stromboli's looking good. If your oven is insane like mine is, you might want to rotate the things you're baking halfway through because they're going to bake unevenly. And I definitely have to do that right now with this stromboli. So when I say rotate it, you're just going to turn it 180 degrees to where the front is now in the back and the back's now in the front. Okay, that was a great question about proofing. Yeah, it's one of those things, you know. It's like with the proofing the pizza dough. You can get away with a lot of flexibility. I say have some fun, experiment, and figure out what you like. When we started, I know I've said that before, but when we started our pizza business, it was really, it didn't start out as saying, hey, let's start a pizza business. We had a farm. But it started out with me not finding the slices that I wanted to find. You know, I've been lucky to travel around this country a lot. And I grew up in the Northeast where there's a wide variety of pizza, and I like all of it, but there are certain kinds that I like the best. And I just wanted to be able to learn how to make that for selfish reasons, as I've said before, just so we could have it in our house, just so we could have that pizza. And then once we did it enough, we got to a point where we're like, well, you know what? I think we nailed it. This is at a point now we want to share it. And that's how it developed. But it really, you know, cooking should be in my opinion, you know, it's a lot more fun, and it feels like a lot less of a burden when you're passionate about what you're making and when you're going to enjoy it, you know. Don't force yourself into cooking a bunch of stuff that you already know you definitely don't like. If you want to try some new stuff, awesome. I encourage that, but don't find recipes that you want to make. Find things that excite you. It's awesome now because you don't have to pay money to subscribe to magazines if you can't. You can get all that information for free. And you can find recipes, and then you can find ways to learn it by coming places like this and other resources where you can have someone advise you a little bit on how to make it easier on yourself to learn some of these techniques. And once you do, I challenge you to do, you know, 10 new recipes over the next 3 months. And you'll, just from those 10 recipes, you'll learn so many skills just because you have to, you know? Mm-hmm. So I encourage you to find stuff that you want to cook. I my whole life wanted to make fresh pasta and never knew anybody that knew how to make it. And then one day was like, you know what, I got to learn how to make this. And when I did, it changed a lot of things for me.
There's a couple of questions in the chat right now. One is, how long do you cook the garlic knots? And then somebody else would like to know what the ratio filling would be for a gooey cinnamon roll using this dough.
I mean, you could use this dough for a cinnamon roll. People do that. Really, you could do the same time. I mean, I personally love cinnamon rolls. I'm a little bit, you know, if you can't tell already, I would suggest making them the traditional way. But if you want to use pizza dough and turn them into cinnamon rolls, you can definitely do it. Roll it out into that flat rectangle. If you've ever made them before, you know what I'm talking about. Just a nice thin rectangle that's well floured on bottom so it doesn't stick. And then you're going to take a melted butter that has cooled. You could take, it depends how many cinnamon rolls you're making, but let's say you want to do a dozen cinnamon rolls, okay? Your rectangle piece of dough is going to be about 12 to 16 inches wide. I'd say closer to 16. And it's going to be about 12 inches deep, okay? So you spread it out like before, and just like I showed you with spreading on the garlic oil with a pastry brush, do that same thing. But what you're going to do is you're going to take that cooled melted butter, which should be super easy to spread at this point, and that's where you want it. You don't want it to be completely melted, but you want it to be spreadable. And you just brush it like you're painting real gently, and you put that butter over the entire rectangle of pizza dough. And then you take a mixture of sugar and cinnamon, or brown sugar and cinnamon, or brown sugar and cinnamon. This is totally up to you, and there are a million arguments online on what is the traditional cinnamon roll filling, but you can use any of those. I typically do brown sugar and cinnamon. And as far as the cinnamon level goes, again, decide if you like things to really be super cinnamony or not. You can go either way with it. And then you mix that up by hand or with a whisk, and then you sprinkle that or spread it with your hand, however you want to look at it, a pretty thick layer, depending on how much you like it, on your big rectangle of buttered dough. So you have this nice sanded kind of top now, and just make sure that you leave maybe like a ½ inch or even as much of an inch of dough on the rim closest to you. Leave it uncovered with anything except butter. Don't put any cinnamon or sugar on it. Because when you roll that whole thing up, just like we did with the bread, when we rolled it up, you know, the one big sheet, you're going to do that same thing with the cinnamon rolls. You're going to try to do it tight, you know, and keep tucking it as you go like that. And you're going to roll all that cinnamon sugar filling is going to roll up inside of it. So you don't even get your hands on the cinnamon sugar. It's just right on top of the dough. And then you get to the end, you're going to pinch that non-cinnamon and sugared edge to the rest of it. So it seals it shut, just kind of like we did with the bread, actually. It's actually an awesome question that you asked, because I would have never connected those things, but I know a lot of pizza businesses that sell cinnamon roll based kind of desserts off pizza dough. And it's almost exactly like making a lot of the things we just made. So I appreciate you asking that. As far as baking goes, it is pizza dough, so it's not going to be exactly like regular cinnamon rolls. But I'd say, you know, 375, 400 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, Stromboli's ready. I want to show you what it looks like when it comes fresh out of the oven. I know we're just about done here. Oh, I know you asked about garlic knot times. Garlic knot times, really just when they look brown or golden brown to you, they're done. It's going to be one of those things that's really just evident when they're ready. It's going to take a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Oh, check this out. That is a fresh stromboli here. Let me get it in better light for you.
Wow.
Wow. Bubbling cheese. You see it comes out, it looks great coming out of the vents, right, that you made. Nice and golden brown. There's our garlic nuts, which I'm definitely eating in a minute. This one that I put in last could use another minute, honestly. But there's your garlic nuts, you know. You got your own, then you can open your own pizzeria. You're ready to go, folks. Okay. Any questions to end this thing out? Anything at all? Don't be shy. It doesn't have to be directly related to these recipes. Well, if no one has any questions related to these, how about another question? What are some things that you'd like to see us teaching cooking?
Looks like next week, Terry, we're doing some salad dressings, some quick pickles. The fresh stuff is starting to come in now.
Oh, yes. The
so
garden is booming.
We'll be cooking with fresh ingredients.
Sounds great. It's the best thing about this time of year. It forces me to eat healthy because we have so much stuff coming in the garden. I just feel obligated to eat it all. Yeah, I'm excited about that. And next week we're going to get, I showed her very briefly there, but Shaughnessy, my partner in crime, she is going to help me and Josh out next week with the quick pickle and salad class. She loves making salads and salad dressings, and pretty typical around here. Whoever works with us for the day on the farm, we come in for lunch and we have a huge salad because we can finish working up in the farm, pick everything, and then she makes a dressing that we can hold on to for a couple of days. And it's a very quick, it doesn't have to be a laborious thing. It can be a quick thing if you plan correctly, like I said with the pizza dough. Just make enough to make it count for a couple of meals, and it's well worth your time and effort.
I'll make sure to pick some unusual stuff for next week. I made a salad last night, and there was a few wild things in the garden, so I always like to take advantage of those if I can.
Awesome.
So we'll show some dandelion greens and garlic mustard and wood sorrel, and violets are past, but
I was just gonna say I can grab some violets.
Yeah, pea shoots are coming in now, so we could throw some in there. Radish blossoms. So we got a lot of cool stuff that we can add to those salads.
Sounds great. I'm excited, but I'm more excited about this stromboli I'm about to eat.
Can I ask you a question about the yeast? Are there different kinds of yeast, or?
Great question, and it's not the simplest answer, but yes, in general. There's fresh yeast, which is like cake yeast. It's not something you're probably, I wouldn't recommend going there first as your first option, just as a home baker. The easiest thing to use is just going to be like a instant or an active dry yeast. So unfortunately, right now with the current circumstances, it's actually something that's kind of hard to get. Depending on when you visit the grocery store, whether you're going to Wegmans or the Co-op or Tops or wherever, because since the pandemic hit, way more people, I mean, that's an understatement of the century, way more people have been baking. So it's the first time ever that I've seen all the yeast sold out at Wegmans, honestly, ever in my life. So you can get it. You just, if they don't have it on the shelf, they'll have a sign up that says they're sold out. Just ask when they're getting some in. You can always order some. There's a couple major brands, basically Red Star or Fleischmann's, but I'll show you. I think I may have a package here I can show you. I'm not sure. I keep most of mine at the prep kitchen. Nah, I don't. But it looks kind of crazy, you know? It looks like tiny little pellets, tiny little pellets. You can't tell they're pellets till you look up close. But once you open a package, they usually have them vacuum packed typically, because otherwise you have to keep it refrigerated. Once you open it, put it in something. I like to keep it in a jar that always has the wrong label on it. It says San Marzano, and keep it in the fridge. And, you know, I find we do pizza a lot, so I get to watch a lot of observations with yeast. But the fresher the yeast is, you know, if I just opened a package, it's a lot more active than yeast I've been holding on to for a month. So just keep that in mind. But it'll keep for a while in the jar. I mean, months and months and months.
If anybody gets up to Souders in Seneca Falls, they have a lot of baking supplies. The last time I was there, they had a good selection of bulk yeasts.
That's great. And that's a great, you know, bulk. Buy a bunch of it, because like I said, if you have an opportunity to buy a few packs of it, buy it. They do sell little, like people that just want to bake a little bit, they sell these little paper packets that come in like a strip, you know, where you can kind of tear them off and use one at a time. Those are great too. If you have that and it's easier for you, it tells you an exact, I can't remember if they're 3 or 4 ounce packages, I think, or 2.5 ounce packages. I can't remember. But yeah, that's a great tip. And buy if you're going to buy a bunch of it to keep on hand. You can make so many things with it.
Thanks.
Any other tips? Anybody else got some tips? You guys are more local than I am, so I'd love any other insight like that.
I was just wondering if you do any egg wash or anything on any of these products ever. I mean, is that like too foo-foo-y or?
No, not at all. So honestly, the first calzone first stromboli I made today that I made before you guys showed up did have egg wash on it. We were, in all honesty, we forgot to bring eggs from up top on the farm earlier today, so I ended up using my last egg earlier, and then I didn't know where it was when I was making your stromboli. But you'll see, even without any egg wash or water wash, it came out pretty golden brown. But yeah, you could do egg wash with cream or water. You could even just do a water wash. But yeah, that's a great idea. If you are less forgetful than me, definitely do it. Garlic knots, you could do it again, not real super necessary, but again, like you said, I wouldn't say it's foo-foo-y. When I remember to do a wash, I do it on everything that I bake when I remember.
Now with the garlic knots, when I go to like Gerlando's, they come and they're swimming in garlic butter. I trust that's just the same fresh garlic chopped with some melted butter, maybe some Italian spices.
Yes. Yeah, and butter's a great way to go too. You know, I'm one of those people that's a huge advocate for butter. So if you love butter, do it. I tend to, when I'm teaching people or like selling stuff, I tend to opt for the oil thing just because they're vegan, but I love butter as an option for it. And if I bake anything, I substitute butter for vegetable oil. So I'm on board with that. And Italian spices for sure, especially if you got some fresh ones laying around. It's going to take it to another level. You might make the best garlic knots you've ever had if you use some fresh herbs. What else? Any other?
That's a good reminder, Terry. I'll take a little video down at the permaculture park this week and harvest some herbs for the next class for the salad dressing. But a lot of stuff is available right now. So
that sounds great. And that's something everybody can grow. I don't care where you live. You can grow some herbs in your window. One of your windows, some herbs, maybe not all of them, but it's a great thing to have some fresh herbs. And there's nothing like, you could have the most boring dried package of pasta laying around in your cupboard and be exhausted. If you have that pasta and some butter, some cheese, and those herbs, you're going to have a heck of a dinner with very little effort. So if that's it, we're going to call it for the week. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you or not see you. Good work, buddy. Great work. Enjoy your dinner, okay?
Thanks so much. This has been really terrific. There's a lot of ideas I know I'm going to try right away.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So excited.
Really good.
Thank you.
thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.